Welcome to Buddhism in Action, a monthly event where we sift through some of the challenging questions facing our global community. Our guest speaker tonight is Venerable Dreame, a Buddhist nun and teacher who has been studying and practicing and working at Buddhist meditation centers since 1984. And now, Venerable Dreame.
Welcome everyone. Tonight's topic is Enlightened Government. We will be on the air for approximately 1 hour, but I expect to stop maybe after 45 minutes to take your questions. So those of you who are listening and watching online, you can go ahead and submit your questions as you think of them, and then we'll look at those after I finish talking. And those of you who are here with us in person, you can also ask your questions at that time. Okay, so the reason I thought of this topic is that there is a monk living at the center where I stay, which is Land of Medicine Buddha, who is studying for his citizenship exam, and he's a Tibetan monk. So I've been eavesdropping on the tutorials he's receiving from one of the other staff members. So some of the phrases that we hear in our country's founding documents have been, recited many times in our dining room lately. Some of the words from the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And then, of course, it's a political year. So we're hearing so many people talk about the Constitution. You know, they say it's in the Constitution or it's not constitutional. It's almost like the Constitution of the United States is like the Bible for many people. They believe in it the way they believe in the Bible. It's almost our religion. So some people might be listening from outside of the United States, such as Canada. But I myself was in the Parliament building in Victoria, British Columbia last month, and I saw the Bill of Rights. So I know that Canada has a Bill of Rights, so some of the same type of language is in Canada's, documents of, Constitution or establishing the government. And I heard maybe somebody's listening from New Zealand. I actually lived in New Zealand for a year, many, many years ago. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know anything about New Zealand's constitution, but I'm sure many other countries have these kinds of documents that set out what we believe in, what our country is striving to establish. And so then we get off course. We don't always live up to those ideals, but I think they were really amazing ideas that people put down at the beginning of their vision for what this country was going to be. Now, I am not actually trying to make any kind of political statement. I'm not saying that certain laws need to be passed or abolished or certain people need to be elected or not elected. I'm actually using these words as a springboard, as an excuse to talk about Buddhist ideas, because the words do sound Buddhist. So this is like a Buddhist commentary on our Constitution. And in that sense, it's similar to a commentary that His Holiness the Dalai Lama gave many years ago, at least 20 or more years ago, in England, when a group of Catholic monks asked His Holiness to speak on the Gospels. You know, isn't that brave of them to ask a Buddhist monk to talk about the Christian literature? So they had selected different passages from the New Testament. And His Holiness wasn't trying to say what Christianity says about those words. He wasn't really trying to tell those Christian monks what they should think those words mean. He was just reading those words or listening to those words and then saying what it reminded him of, what that would relate to in Buddhism. So something like that. Then it might circle back around to, okay, now as Buddhist citizens, how are we going to bring our ideas into the way we relate to our country and our community? Does Buddhism have to just be our secret stay-at-home practice, or does it come back around and inform how we conduct ourselves as citizens? So we might get around to that during the discussion. So the first document I would like to talk about is a passage from the Declaration of Independence, which says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So, I started to draft some ideas about equality. Buddhism certainly has something to say about all beings are equal and wanting happiness and not wanting suffering and so forth. But you know that already, so I won't belabor that point. The issue of what are rights is very interesting, so I started to play around with some ideas about where do rights come from? Do they come from God? Do they come from the government? Where do rights come from? But then I scratched that out too. And I want to go right down to the end of that passage to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Isn't that an amazing phrase? You know, that somebody, almost like 250 years ago now, said that we're establishing a country that believes that everybody should have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happiness is elusive, isn't it? My parents always told me, oh, do whatever you want, dear, as long as you're happy. I sometimes say it would have been easier if they told me to be a doctor, right? At least that's something clear. But in a way, I did fulfill their instruction. I've pursued this path, which is basically teaching how to be happy, how to be free of suffering. So recently, the Dalai Lama was giving some talks in Colorado. Actually, he was traveling around the United States in June. And I listened to a couple of talks that he gave in Colorado. And one of the audience members asked His Holiness, what is the meaning of life? Or what is the purpose of life? I can't remember exactly which one he asked. And His Holiness answered, happiness. And that's so surprising. It's like, what? Just happiness? That's the meaning of life? So it sounds very simple, but it's also very profound that, of course, we all want to be happy. His Holiness likes to pull science into it, showing how, even from an evolutionary standpoint, happiness is beneficial to our survival as a species. That when we're happy, our immune system is better, our judgment is better. When we're angry and upset, then our immune system is suppressed. We don't make very good decisions. And so maybe just in terms of survival of the species, happiness is important. But those of us who are sort of plagued by these questions about what is life for, that's not quite good enough either. We don't just want to survive, we want to fulfill our potential. So this is the part that's interesting to me, is that this phrase here, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to me, we would call that having a meaningful life. I think our teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he sums that up as, how to have a meaningful life. He's given talks about that. There's some book written like that, how to have a meaningful life. Now, isn't that an interesting idea that maybe the government can support that? That maybe what an enlightened government would do would be to help everyone have a meaningful life. We have a lot of different ideas about what makes it meaningful, but not simply to survive, but to actually fulfill our potential. I think that's an amazing idea. So maybe some of the listeners have some ideas about what makes a meaningful life. So we're going to circle around eventually to this idea of Buddhahood, which is the end goal. When we walk in the room of a Tibetan Buddhist center or a teaching in our tradition, in the FPMT tradition and the Gelug tradition, right off the bat, the opening prayers are saying, I vow to become a Buddha in order to save all sentient beings. So right at the beginning, we haven't even heard what Buddhahood means, but they're telling us this is where we're going with this. All of these teachings, all of these meditations, all of these practices are aimed at becoming a Buddha. So that sounds like, what does that mean? I'm going to be an Indian monk. I don't know if I really want to be a Buddha. Some people think a Buddha is just like this fat guy at the entrance of a Chinese restaurant, That's not what we're talking about. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche often explains that we're talking about Sangye. Sangye. Have some of you heard that? Those of you who have been at Rinpoche's teachings? He gives this etymology many times. So what we're trying to achieve is that the Tibetan word for Buddha, the Tibetans didn't just take the word Buddha into Tibetan, they coined their own terms. They asked the Indian Buddhist masters, what do you mean by Buddha? Then they coined a new word in Tibetan. So Sang means purified, and Gye means developed. So even before I tell you anything about what you've purified and what you've developed, that sounds kind of interesting, doesn't it? So to say that to fulfill one's potential has something to do with being purified and developed. So in Buddhism, what we're talking about when we say purified is removing all of your delusions, removing all of your obstacles, mental problems. You can call those delusions. Your misunderstanding about reality, and then your upset emotions about things because of thinking that things truly exist. So those are all called delusions or obscurations. So purifying yourself of that, that's an interesting goal, having a meaningful life. Like, what is your purpose as a human being, as a citizen of this country? Like, your purpose is to remove your delusions. What if our government were somehow involved in helping people remove delusions? I mean, the government does support certain things like education, the arts. There are some mental health agencies. The government, of course, is not just in Washington, D.C. or in Sacramento. In our case, we're in California. The government's all around us, the county government, the city government. Even your own company or organization has a type of government. So wouldn't that be an interesting idea that what the government is meant to do is help you purify your delusions? What do you think of that? And then develop your realizations and qualities. So the Gye means, in the case of Buddhahood, it means those types of knowledge and qualities and abilities which enable a person to help others. So a lot of people, that's really more than happiness. What they want to do to have a meaningful life is to contribute. They want to learn a skill. They want to have some kind of avenue, some kind of vehicle for benefiting others. Many people find that more than saying happiness, they would feel satisfied. They would feel like it's been a life well lived if they were able to help others, to contribute to others, to remove their suffering, to give them some happiness. So that's going to be the big picture. We're assuming that this enlightened government is going to creatively assist all of its citizens in Sangye, purifying and developing. So in one of those Colorado talks, His Holiness the Dalai Lama mentioned last month that there's something so fortunate about being a human. We as humans, we have language and we can communicate. We have a special kind of brain, which of course, animals have a brain, but they don't have the human brain, which is able to think in abstracts. And of course, our language helps us a lot to think in abstracts. So we have the potential to develop a happy, joyful life and to avoid suffering in creative ways by using our brain, by figuring out what's the actual source of the problem, what possible solutions we could apply. And we can think longer term, and wider perspective than animals. Of course, Buddhism also talks about other life forms besides animals, but we can all understand about animals. So that's interesting. Longer term and wider perspective. You take it for granted that you have a human brain, but what about our pets? What about the animals living here in Monterey Bay? Are they able to think longer term or wider perspective? Sometimes when I set the motivation in our meditations at Land of Medicine Buddha, I don't use the traditional Tibetan words. I say, check why you're here, clarify your motivation, and then try to make it more inclusive, including some other people, even just your family or people you care about. And then don't make it just for today or just this week, but make it for this year, this lifetime, for all your lifetimes up to enlightenment. So, do you think cats can think like that? Dogs? You know, I don't really know what whales and dolphins think about. They're said to be very intelligent. Maybe they do think long term. But anyway, we know that we as human beings can do that, and not all creatures can. So this is one of the very lucky things about being a human. So His Holiness also often is dialoguing with scientists, and he mentions that scientists have studied human nature. I'm not quite sure how they have studied human nature, but His Holiness mentions that that the basic human nature is compassion. Basic human nature is compassion. So many arguments for that, but one is that our very upbringing depends on being nurtured. So we're a species that has to have a connection with other human beings in order to survive. And so anyway, there's this combination of wisdom and compassion that we have as human beings that's very fortunate and that can be developed. So these are all His Holiness's ideas about what we would call the fortunate or perfect or precious human rebirth. So this is an issue that relates to freedom. This is one thing that is mentioned many times when people talk about the Bill of Rights. You know, the Bill of Rights protects our freedoms. We have certain freedoms. So in classical Buddhism, we hear about the 8 freedoms and the 10 opportunities. The freedoms are mainly the fact that we are free from very intense problems, suffering, obstacles that would block us from developing our potential. So being a human, right off the bat, it eliminates many other states of existence where we just wouldn't have the opportunity or wouldn't have the freedom to develop our potential. So the 10 opportunities include being a human, but they also include being a human in the right place at the right time, with helpful people around us, with education, and specifically with access to the Buddha's teachings and people who are practicing the Buddha's teachings. So those are all opportunities that help us develop our potential. So I don't mean to be too sectarian, but I did say I was using these words as a way to talk about Buddhist ideas. So then you could generalize that and come back and say, well, what does Dharma practice mean in a general way, or what does spiritual practice mean in a general way? But in the case of the classical list of opportunities, we're talking about opportunities to hear the teachings of the Buddha. There are the people around us practicing them. There are kind people that are going to help support our practice. So as a matter of fact, all of us here attending live have that. I don't know about people who are tuning in from other places, but you can check. So now I'm going to refer to the Preamble of the Constitution. So again, this is the Constitution of the United States. If you're from another country, maybe your country has some similar language. So it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So if any of you are reading the words on screen, you might notice that the spelling and capitalization is different from how we use in modern day English. That's not a mistake, that's just the way it was written back then. So there's a lot of things that are capitalized. Okay, I was almost going to skip over the word union, and I just couldn't resist. It's such an interesting one. At first you think, oh, that's not really the main point. There's some more interesting words there like tranquility and general welfare. But wait a minute, let's not skip union. It says a more perfect union. So many of our prayers, recitations in Buddhism talk about union, different kinds of union. So one of the first types of union that we come across is the union of calm abiding and insight, or calm abiding and special insight, which is shamatha and vipassana, or shine and laktong in Tibetan. Shamatha vipassana is Sanskrit, shine laktong would be Tibetan. So genuine realizations emerge from a union or a combining of a fully qualified calm abiding state of mind, which means a very stable, single-pointed mind, which is free of distraction, and insight, investigating the nature of reality. So that could be different aspects of reality, such as impermanence, or how I exist as a person, or how things in general exist ultimately. And so it's this union, this putting together of the calm abiding and the special insight that become the gateways and the landmarks on our progress, on our path toward enlightenment. Each step going up through what are called the paths and the grounds come about because of a coming together, this kind of union. So it would be just an interesting idea in some kind of like Dharma country that this is being supported, that we're supporting people to be able to develop calm abiding and insight and put those together and have realizations, that would be a kind of a priority as much as maybe the military is, or the gross national product or something like that, that we might measure our success each year by how many people are managing to have realizations. What would be the abbreviation for that gross national realization? GNR. So then the next type of union is the union of method and wisdom. Method and wisdom. So this comes up in the famous mantra, which is almost the national motto of Tibet, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, or Om Mani Padme Hum, which literally the Padma is a lotus, and the Om Mani Padme, the Mani is a jewel, the Padma is a lotus, but it refers to, the Mani refers to method or compassion. You can say compassion in this context because the methods are all manifestations of compassion or for the sake of compassion. And Padma, the lotus representing wisdom. Mani literally means jewel, Padma means lotus, but it refers to the unification of method and wisdom. So that mantra is describing what we need to do. We need to unify those. And it is describing the state of complete enlightenment, which is those two have been unified. So there's the perfect union. So then we get more and more esoteric understanding of union or unification in the secret teachings, where it refers to unifying clear light and illusory body, which is the method for attaining Buddhahood in the secret mantra Vajrayana. So I won't go into any more details than that, but that's just a little teaser, or maybe you already do those practices and then you'll notice that word there. And then the state of Buddhahood being the perfect union of holy mind and holy body, or Dharmakaya and Rupakaya. So I don't know, I just feel like these words could have been written by Buddhas. They could have been written by enlightened beings, just putting little secret treasures in there. In Tibetan they call these termas, these treasure teachings. Like, oh, it looked like an ordinary word, but when you think about it, it's like saying, you know, what we're doing here is aiming to attain a more perfect union. Establish justice, of course we could talk about that in the same vein as equality. Then it says, ensure domestic tranquility. That's really nice words. Tranquility, you could also call that peace. Tranquility could be called peace. Shiwa in Tibetan. We don't really need the Tibetan word, but the word peace in Buddhist language, it's a code word for nirvana. In some of our poems and recitations, it talks about attaining peace, or the equality of samsara and nirvana. Sometimes it says samsara and peace. So peace is a code word. You could say peace with a capital P for nirvana, which means a state beyond sorrow. So we could read this as, you know, that this constitution is being set forth in order to establish nirvana for its people, for the people of this country, maybe the people of the world. And what is nirvana? Nirvana is a state of being free from afflictions, which means the delusions and the afflicted emotions or upset emotions that come from thinking that things are truly existent. So nirvana literally means a state beyond sorrow, but what does it consist of? It consists of having become free. Talk about freedoms, becoming free of our mental problems and the suffering that comes from those mental problems. Of course, not all of our problems are mental, but when you look for the original source, it's the karma that we created because of having those delusions. So then removing our misunderstanding about the way things exist, we remove the platform for the karma to ripen. Technically, they say the karma doesn't just go away, but if you take away your ignorance, they say grasping at true existence, which means the ignorance assuming that things are truly existent. If you take that away, then the karma doesn't have anywhere to grow. So that's the domestic tranquility. Okay, now the common defense. Actually, I have quite a few verses for this section. Common defense, normally we would think that's to defend ourselves against some outside enemy. At the time this was written, they were probably thinking defending ourselves against England. And later there may have been other enemies that were in mind. But in Buddhism, are we talking about the outer enemy? No, we're talking about the inner enemy. Even the appearance of an outer enemy is coming from something within ourselves, some delusion, some emotional disturbance. So Shantideva, the author of the Bodhicharyavatara, Bodhisattva Way of Life, had a lot to say about this topic. It's covered in 3 different sections, I found, probably more, but at least it's mentioned in the patience chapter and in the chapter on enthusiasm or joyful effort, and it's mentioned in the chapter on meditation, which turns out to be mainly about overcoming self-grasping. When you see, oh, there's a chapter on meditation, you think you're going to learn the sitting posture and how to breathe. And no, that chapter isn't anything to do with that. It's half, about some other things about getting over your attachment, and then the other half, getting over your self-cherishing. So, in the patience chapter, Shantideva, in several verses, is pointing out that the actual enemy is hatred. Hatred is the enemy that we need to get rid of, not the outer enemy, but our own hatred. And another important point is that even when people are attacking us, when it looks like an outer enemy is either attacking us verbally or physically, we need to keep in mind that people are not in control of their own actions. They are under the control of their own mental afflictions. And then in addition to that, they are the manifestation of my own karma. So the fact that an enemy is showing up in my life is because in the past I harmed someone else and planted that karmic seed, and then that's showing up right now. Why did I plant that karmic seed? That's because of my own anger and hatred and delusions that made me do that. So then, how would it be to retaliate? Retaliating seems like a normal course of action from ordinary perspective. So if I retaliate, I'm just going to create more of the same negative karma that's going to come back to me again. So retaliating is only going to harm myself. These are Shantideva's 3 main points in the patience chapter. Let me read you a verse or two just so you get the idea. Whatever wholesome deeds, such as venerating the Buddhas and generosity that have been amassed over 1,000 eons, will all be destroyed in one moment of anger. There is no evil like hatred, and no fortitude like patience. Thus I should strive in various ways to meditate on patience. My mind will not experience peace if it fosters painful thoughts of hatred. I shall find no joy or happiness. Unable to sleep, I shall feel unsettled. A master who has hatred is in danger of being killed, even by those who for their wealth and happiness depend upon his kindness. This is talking about like the boss or the head of the household. If that person is a very angry person, then even his own employees or family are going to harm him and maybe even kill him. By it, friends and relatives are disheartened. Though drawn by my generosity, they will not trust me. In brief, there is nobody who lives happily with anger. Hence, the enemy, anger, creates sufferings such as these. But whoever assiduously overcomes it finds happiness now and hereafter. Wouldn't that be an interesting government that helped us to get over our anger instead of stirring up our anger? I wonder how we could actually do that in our country. Instead of like every time there's election, we all get angry at each other. Spend like 2 years getting angry. Maybe there's a different way to do it. Okay. So when seeing an enemy or even a friend committing an improper action, by thinking that such things arise from conditions, I shall remain in a happy frame of mind. And then Shantideva is going into, why should we be angry at that person who seems to be harming us? If things were brought into being by choice, then since no one wishes to suffer, suffering would not occur to any embodied creature. Through not being careful, people even harm themselves with thorns and other things, and for the sake of obtaining women and the like, they become obsessed and deprive themselves of food. There are some who injure themselves through the unmeritorious deeds of hanging themselves, leaping from cliffs, eating poison and unhealthy foods. If, when under the influence of disturbing conceptions, people will even kill their treasured selves, how can they be expected not to cause harm to the bodies of other living beings? Even if I cannot develop compassion for all such people who through the arisal of disturbing conceptions set out to try and kill me and so forth, the last thing I should do is to become angry with them. I mean, seriously, a lot of people look back on, what's happened in the past 15 years and thought if we could have a do-over, how much better it might have been, right? To not retaliate. That might, we don't know, we're not omniscient, but maybe we didn't need to retaliate when the World Trade Towers came down and the Pentagon, It would be interesting if we had had a Buddha in the White House. And of course, for us to have a Buddha in the White House, I think this is very, very important right now. Not as I'm putting my finger on the table, I'm going to say not pointing the finger, because we need to create the karma, we need to create the causes, the merit. If we have the karma to have an enlightened leader, we need to bring that karma up to the front of the queue by our own virtue, by our own positive actions. If we don't have the merit for that to happen, then we need to think, how can I create that kind of merit? Where does that merit come from to have enlightened leadership? Okay, that's about hatred and the outer enemy. Excuse me. Okay. Domestic tranquility, common defense, maybe that's enough for common defense. General welfare, I want to talk about the general welfare. So this is because in the preamble it says to promote the general welfare. So in the chapter on meditation, Shantideva is talking about exchanging self with others, pros and cons of following self-cherishing and cherishing others. So as Buddhist practitioners, we need to constantly work on this in our day-to-day life. It could be interesting to think about that on a national level, with all the sense of protectionism, like we're not going to let those people take our jobs, we're not going to let them come into our country. Kind of interesting idea, like does it really work for one country to just think about its own needs and not consider the whole population? When His Holiness is talking about benefiting beings, is he talking about benefiting only the people in one country? No. During those Colorado teachings I've referred to a couple of times now, he keeps saying 7 billion people. And he's, considering all of those 7 billion people to be his brothers and sisters. So we're not thinking just this little group of my friends, my relatives, my country. Okay, so how does it go when just on an individual level, if you follow the self-centered attitude? So there's layers to that. One is thinking that there is a real me, which is called self-grasping. And then on top of the self-grasping is the sort of emotional habit of what about me, which is called self-cherishing. Self-cherishing, I think, oh yes, it's, there is such a thing as taking care of yourself. It's valid to create the causes for happiness and, take care of your own peace of mind and so forth. But that's not what self-cherishing is. Self-cherishing is a kind of a worried, anxious, mantra going on in the back of your mind. Maybe not consciously, but sort of informing your feelings. If you're starting to get anxious, say someone brings in a carton of ice cream, which would be nice now, it's kind of hot this evening. Someone brings in a carton of ice cream and they start over on that side of the room and start dishing it out. And about the middle of the room, it's getting like they're like scraping the edges, and you get over to this side of the room. The what about me is starting to get kind of nervous. So that's interesting. There's a classic story about that in Tibetan, Buddhist history. I think it was the famous thought transformation practitioner called Ben Kungyal, who was at a big offering where they were giving out yogurt. Instead of ice cream in Tibet, they would give out yogurt. So this was a special treat. Yogurt was something that would only be offered if there were a benefactor come to give out big pots of yogurt to the monks. So you have to have your bowl out, and they start at the head of the row, and they dish out the yogurt, one monk at a time. And so Ben Kungyal was thinking, oh, they're going to give out all the yogurt, and it's going to be gone by the time it gets to me. And he kept thinking, like, they shouldn't be giving out such big scoops. They should portion it. They just give a little bit and then see how much there is left. And, I don't know how many monks were in front of him, maybe 25 or 30 monks. So he had a lot of time to think about this. And then as the pot was getting closer to him, he could see that there was plenty more. Maybe they even brought a different pot, It's like, oh, we have another tub of ice cream in the freezer, don't worry. So then he realized that the whole time, instead of like rejoicing for the merit of the benefactor or rejoicing in the good fortune of all those monks up the row, he had just been thinking, what about me? What about me? Am I going to get any? And just, creating a lot of unsettled mind and grasping and anger and so forth. So he just took his bowl and, you see the way these outfits are made, there's kind of a kangaroo pocket in here. This is where you keep everything. So he just took his bowl and put it back in his shirt. And then when the yogurt pot got to him, they said, well, where's your bowl? And he says, I've already eaten mine. He ate it in his mind, So that's what we're talking about when we say the self-cherishing mind. It doesn't mean that you don't get any yogurt or you don't get any ice cream. It's just that what about me habit that drives us crazy, that disturbs our peace of mind. Okay, so general welfare means, to me, I would say that means exchanging, we would call that exchanging self with others, exchanging always just thinking about one person, trading that in and thinking about the bigger community. And then we get so many benefits from that, don't we? Just even tangible, ordinary benefits such as peaceful relations, other people around us who are happy to help us. So maybe you can think of other short-term benefits. And then long-term benefit we get, Buddhahood. You need to develop this wider perspective, which becomes compassion, which then becomes what we call bodhicitta. Bodhicitta means not just living your life for your own self-gratification or what about me, but living your life. Everything you do, whether you're doing religious things or just day-to-day things, everything you do, you're doing it, dedicating it for others, doing some kind of compassion meditation. Either you're literally helping others or just doing your own work, your own inner work or your own job for others. So then everything becomes a cause for your enlightenment. Everything becomes a cause for your bodhicitta, which is the attitude of a bodhisattva, and then it becomes one of the causes for your enlightenment. So that is also summed up at the end of the preamble. Secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So posterity means the people that come after you. So in general, you can say others. So this is also a code word for Buddhahood. Buddhahood is, in addition to being like purified and developed, or the unification of holy mind and holy body, there's different ways of talking about Buddhahood. One is having accomplished the welfare of self and others. Having accomplished the welfare of self and others. So maybe the Founding Fathers put a little hidden treasure in the preamble that hinted at that we are aiming to accomplish the state of complete enlightenment, which is also called accomplishing the welfare of oneself and others. So those are my ideas. That's my little commentary on the preamble. So now it is 7:45 in our time zone. And if anybody in the room wants to comment? Did you write something down or think of a question? There are some discussion questions. Maybe I'll ask you a question. I don't know where I put the discussion questions. Here they are. Do we have one already?
There's a question here about your story about the monk and the yogurt and the what about me mindset. The comment is that they loved your story, but we live in such a consumerist society. How on earth can we bridge the gap between the values upheld by our consumerist culture and the values that you have talked about tonight? Where to start?
Well, consumer culture, I mean, there are a lot of pressures on us. I know where we live here in California, just to survive, just to keep our head above water. It's quite competitive, cost of living and so forth. But then once we've fulfilled our basic needs and we're just shopping, online or shopping in person, I've noticed that when I think, oh, maybe I should get one, it makes me tense. Say that, there's a new gadget that's a little bit better than the gadget you have. The computer that I'm using for my work right now, I got in 2009. So now it seems like, a dinosaur. So then I start looking, what kind of computers are out there now? There's so many possibilities. How am I going to get one? And then I'm making myself anxious. And then if I just decide, okay, maybe I don't need one, then suddenly there's just relaxation. Or if I'm going out window shopping, even at the supermarkets around here, we have so many delicious, delicious, wonderful things to eat, to buy. And you can go through the produce aisle or the hot food section and you could think, there's so many, which one should I get? How can I get them all? Even if you have the money, you just feel like this smorgasbord buffet of so many things to eat. And then if you just switch it and think, no, I don't need that. So just making a distinction between what you need and what you're just piling on, like maybe I want that, maybe I want that, what do I want? That to me just makes some relaxation. And then when we're shopping, we can follow one of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's instructions, which is to mentally offer it. Oh, you like all of the beautiful produce there? Then you just offer it up. Offer it up. Offering it means you visualize sending it to all the enlightened beings, sort of like an email attachment that you CC a whole bunch of people, and then they receive it, and then they love it, and then it generates bliss in their holy bodies, and then of course that makes you so happy, holy body and mind. So it makes you so happy. So offer it, whatever desire objects you see, make it an offering.
There was a comment that from Stephen that notes that we get our society gets the government that it deserves, an expression that he has heard before. But one question that comes to mind is that how can we blend the contemplative life and a life of service? It seems like a contemplative life takes so much focus, and a life of service takes so much focus. And how is it possible to be of service to a government, whether it's a city government or a county government or a national government, and yet maintain a life of contemplation?
Yes. So a bodhisattva is not necessarily going to be doing busy work. You can still be serving others by doing your practice. So there's a time and place, I think, for being active, and there's a time for just doing your own quiet work, whether it's on a day-to-day basis or year-to-year. There might be times when you pull back and just nourish yourself, do your own retreat, and so forth. So it doesn't need to all be busy work in order to be for the benefit of sentient beings. We need to think long-term. Maybe what I need to do is remove my delusions or develop my realizations in order to actually be of benefit. Then if you're literally involved in your city council or something like that, I think keeping in mind just this question, just a kind of a doubt, whether you're watching the politics on TV or involved in a discussion. It could even be a staff meeting. It doesn't necessarily need to be the government. To just ask yourself, does it necessarily exist the way it appears? Or maybe it doesn't exist the way it appears. That is going to cool down whatever upset feelings you're having. Like, you know, in politics we can get so angry at the people that belong to the other party or have the other point of view. And, you know, we're the liberal, progressive, enlightened ones, and then we're getting so angry at the other people. So just, like, chill out. Like, maybe it's not like that. Maybe it's not like that. At least, you know, you don't have to come down for sure on one side or the other, but you can just stay with that little bit of doubt. I think that will help reduce the hysteria. That's my idea.
You said something earlier on in the talk about how your parents saddled you with this "just be happy, dear" line, and how it might be more straightforward if they asked you to be a doctor or something more clear cut. Just curious as to, in terms of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, how was it that you came to decide that the pursuit of happiness was the path that you chose, rather than the Buddhist one? Wondering how that came about.
Okay, you know, in order to really find the roots of this, I have to say that it was when I was getting ready to go to Japan as a teenager, and I was part of a high school exchange program, and so I was doing some research about, you know, other things about Asian culture and history in college. And I thought maybe I was going to go into Buddhism from an academic point of view, but then I realized that what they were teaching at the graduate level wasn't actually hitting the spot. It was like the history of Buddhism and the socio-economic implications of Buddhism, things like that. Saying, no, I actually just want to learn the practices. So I jumped off of that academic track, and I just started working at one of our centers, the retreat center, where you get to do so many things. Working at a Dharma center, I have to put in a plug for whether it's volunteering at a city center or living at a country center. If you're the kind of person who can't stand to just be in a cubicle and to be pigeonholed, which to me would have been a death sentence, to have a job where I was just waiting for it to be 5 o'clock, I just wouldn't have been able to live. That was unbearable. I know for many people that's good enough. It feels secure, it meets their needs, it supports their family, but I just could not live that kind of life. So it's suited me quite well to be involved in this Dharma Center business, because I sometimes am learning construction skills, I'm sometimes doing administrative, talking to people, different things like that. So that's been my life. Okay, that's all the time we have this evening. Thank you very much. So the next episode is of Buddhism in Action will take place online at the same time, 7 p.m., 1 month from now, and that it will be August 17th, Wednesday, August 17th, and the regular speaker for Buddhism in Action, Venerable Tenzin, will be back in town to deliver that talk, and the organizers will be in touch closer to the time by email, giving you the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable Dreamy. Thank you to everyone for participating in Buddhism in Action. We hope it has brought you some fresh perspectives and more clarity. Buddhism in Action takes place from 7 to 8 Pacific Standard Time, the third Wednesday of every month. If you found tonight's show helpful, please spread the word. Also, we welcome your suggestions for future episodes. And thank you again, and good night.